the Cybersecurity and Compliance Podcast with Craig Petronella. Learn about the most current IT security threats in ransomware, phishing, business email compromise, cybercrime tactics, cyber heist schemes, social engineering scams, as well as hints and tips from leading professionals to help you prevent hackers from penetrating your network and dropping ransomware or malware payloads. This podcast will arm you with the best info to defend your network against the latest cyber crimes. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And now, here's your host, Craig Petronella.
Hello, and welcome to another podcast episode, Petronella Cybersecurity. We've got Blake Ray.
Hello.
It's been a few weeks. Sorry, guys. It's been a crazy few months, actually. Today, we wanted to talk about how to choose a cybersecurity provider.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a good topic, especially with the escalating landscape of the cybersecurity vulnerabilities that just seem to never end.
Absolutely. So, Blake, you have a specific question, or what you're thinking as far as to kick it off?
I think there's a lot of people out there that are curious as to how they can vet or test a cybersecurity provider, things to look for, things to avoid. There's a lot of people out there that I know we've worked with that that pose as competent but don't seem to be. So yeah, maybe things that we can look for, things that our listeners should avoid. I think that'd be a pretty cool topic.
Yeah, so I agree. I think that, like any hot industry, I think that there were a lot of IT providers or IT guys that maybe saw an opportunity with cybersecurity and wanted to get into it, but may not be the best qualified, because nowadays cybersecurity is quite a broad topic, as is IT. But they're really two separate roles, much like a general practitioner versus a specialist. So my suggestion for folks looking to hire a cybersecurity company would be to look at their track record, their reviews, references, certifications, accolades, things like that, and then areas of expertise. We've talked in previous episodes around the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or the CMMC, which is a mouthful, I know. But that maturity model is really the latest regulatory standard for cybersecurity. And there's been a lot of push to put the CMMC and have it overtake some older regulations. And I think overall that would be a good thing and make things hopefully less confusing for a lot of folks, especially smaller businesses and companies. You might know this. I'm CMMC certified, Blake CMMC certified. We have a lot of others that are certified on our team and partners. And one of the big things with the CMMC is there's a clear distinction between the roles of cybersecurity and IT. And you can't have the same company playing both sides. It's not ethical, and it's a conflict of interest. So a lot of companies, I don't think, realize that. They may be comfortable with the IT guy that they've been using for a while, or maybe the managed service provider. And, obviously with the latest threat landscape, you might have called your IT guy or your managed service provider about, how do I protect my company from ransomware? Have we done a simulation? What kind of tabletop exercises can we do? So I think that conversation would be naturally brought up to the trusted IT, but the reality is that vendor may not be best suited to deliver. And like I said, there's a good reason of why the Department of Defense put out the CMMC process and why they separated those roles. I think it's good to have a checks and balance. You don't want the person building your network to also be the one responsible for securing your network. So I think that that's probably a good place to start. What do you think? Oh, I can't hear you, Blake. Are you muted?
Yeah, it definitely does seem like a conflict of interest. Obviously, those who are building your network and cybersecurity infrastructure should understand it, and they're going to know the weak points of it because, frankly, none of us have an unlimited budget. Uh, so yeah, they may be able to, I guess, know where the bodies are hidden, or I guess that's a proper.
Skeletons
I
in
don't
the
know.
closet.
Yeah, I don't know if that was a proper analogy, but yeah, and so having somebody else, check your network and go over your network, the health of your cybersecurity policies and infrastructures and cybersecurity hygiene makes a lot of sense because, I mean, you're not taking the same test twice. It's like a student grading their own paper or something.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's a good point. I think that even for our work with the CMMC, we're a registered provider organization or an RPO, and we help a lot of defense industrial based companies or DIB companies, as well as small businesses, medium business enterprise, customers of all shapes and sizes. We help them make sense of a lot of these regulations. CMMC is the newest iteration. That's why it keeps coming up. But even those in healthcare for HIPAA, or now there's the new Federal Trade Commission or FTC regulation for automotive dealerships. We have clients that we help with that. So there's all these new regulations that keep coming out. But even we as a provider, the work that we do under cyber with the CMMC, those companies have to get our work checked by what's called a certified third party organization or a C3PAO. And that their job is only to check and provide the formal audit. So we're not allowed to do the formal audit. We could do what's called a practice audit or a pre-assessment and all the consultative preparatory work to get to the formal audit, but we're not allowed to do the formal audit because it's a conflict of interest. So I actually think that's a great idea. I welcome it because if you look at the supply chain and you look at all the statistics and the threat landscape of all the previous hacks, most of them sadly were self-attestation and they weren't third-party audited. So a lot of these companies that were hacked, they never had a risk assessment from a third party. In the HIPAA world or the medical world, they allow a self-assessment. You don't have to get a third-party assessment. However, a third-party assessment, while most often does cost money and may be viewed as expensive, it's actually one of the cheapest and best things that your company can do because you're getting that specialist to look through everything with a fine-tooth comb. And it's not to put anyone down or criticize anything. It's really just to catch, like Blake said, the skeletons in the closet and hopefully catch them proactively before you have an issue or a breach.
what would you say? I mean, we've worked with a lot of, I know we have worked with a lot of third party IT firms. And I guess in the day-to-day operation side of things, like, I'm sure you've noticed more red flags than I have, but I've certainly noticed some red flags, and maybe I guess our listeners might be able to pick up on some of those things if we can call attention to them in this podcast. So, I guess if our customers or our listeners were vetting a cybersecurity firm, what advice could you give them to look out for in terms of red flags?
Yeah, so some advice would be, like I was saying earlier, looking at track record, looking at references. If they're hesitant to give you references or they're kind of hiding behind the curtain, that's a red flag. If they don't understand the latest regulations and the standards, that's a red flag. This is a little comical to me. Sometimes companies will misspell certain regulations, like HIPAA. A lot of times they'll misspell with two P's, HIPPA, which is incorrect. That is wrong. It is HIPAA. So different regulations like that. I could see like a office person or an employee misspelling it, but your expert, your specialist that should know that regulation inside and out, it's just comical and a bit inexcusable to me for them to misspell it. So that's a red flag in my viewpoint. Like with the same with the CMMC, if they don't know what that stands for or they don't know the lingo, and there's a lot of lingo. I mean, I'm not saying that that person that or that company has to know everything, because we're not that person or that company either. We don't claim to be the know-it-all of every situation. However, it's a red flag when no one in the company or connected to the company via partnership, whatever, can shed light on the topic. That's where it gets a little fishy to me. Experience, in my opinion, is very powerful. Testimonials and references are very powerful. Letting their customers tell you about the experience, hopefully a positive one, is powerful. I know Blake, project that comes to mind that we did for a big bank locally here, I feel like we did a great job of showing and shedding light on, or pulling, like you said, skeletons out of the closet on certain things. And, I feel like we did a great job pretending to be the hackers, because here's the thing, hackers don't care. They're doing their job, and their job in this context or this case is most often stealing intellectual property, causing disruption, whatever malicious act. But the point is that they're not going to wear kids' gloves. They're going to do what they can, right? And when we do a job or we do a project like that, we try to emulate what that experience would look like. So, just like with the military drills, fire drills, different types of practice exercises, like we talked about, tabletop exercises, having companies do these things. If you call your cybersecurity prospective company that you're thinking about hiring and you say, hey, I'd like to do a tabletop. If they're like, what's a tabletop? That's a red flag. If you feel like the lingo better than they do, that's a red flag. So you could check, well-known publications on, ranking, like UpCity is a good one that ranks different companies on their expertise and their awards and things like that. Certifications, that's a good measurement. Different types of certifications exist. But I feel like experience and track record and references or customers that talk about their positive experiences, I feel like that's really the best way to vet, a provider.
Something that I think about too that immediately came to mind, I was waiting for you to say it, but I'm surprised you didn't. Is pricing services or products without fully understanding, your security placement, your security layers, what you have implemented, your current cyber hygiene. I think that to me is the one that I see the most. When I've talked to customers before on the phone, they're like, "Oh yeah, well this person quoted me this amount, this amount." It's like, do they know what servers you're running? Do they know like what type of firewall you're running? Do you know like how many endpoints you have? Like they don't seem to know any of this, but they're still somehow pricing out, services or products.
Yeah, that's a good point. So pricing is a challenging task. From a customer lens is, how much does this cost? What is this going to cost me? How do I budget for this? And oftentimes when you ask a customer, what's your budget? They may not know. They may truthfully not know. Some customers may know, but they don't want to tell you the budget because they feel like that information is going to be used against them. But some customers have never gone through a security risk assessment. They don't know what that costs. And I think what Blake was trying to say is that some companies will charge $500 or $1,000 for an assessment, and some companies will charge $50,000 for an assessment. And obviously, they're different, and we could explain why they're different using different methodologies, using different levels of expertise. This comes up a lot with penetration testing. We've talked about penetration testing or pen testing, where typically with penetration testing, a white hat hacker, a good hacker, will try to break into, with your permission, your computers, your endpoints, your networks, your equipment, using public information or reconnaissance and different tools and tactics. Well, in the industry, a lot of people would abuse the keyword pen test and confuse it with vulnerability assessment, where a vulnerability assessment is a tool, most often software, kind of like your antivirus software, where you run a tool against the network endpoints and the tool then scans databases and comes back with typically what's called a traffic light report. What's green, what's orange or yellow, and what's red. What are your critical alerts? What's wrong? But it's an automated approach. Okay. Well, a lot of managed service providers or IT guys that are kind of dabbling in cybersecurity that are not really cybersecurity experts yet, or maybe not as mature as some other firms, they will effectively misrepresent a vulnerability scan as a pen test. So a pen test typically, all different ranges of scopes and pricing. The pricing ultimately depends on how much time does the human ethical hacker spend per IP address on your stuff or your application. If you've got 50 computers and they spend 15 minutes on each endpoint, you're going to get a price of X. If you are a company that says, look, I want to know if anything exists, take the gloves off, be a hacker, then truthfully, you don't give that white hat hacker, you don't give them a time bracket. You say, go have at it, right? Because a hacker's not going to say, oh, I'm going to stop in 15 minutes. A hacker's going to spend days, weeks, whatever it takes to break into things. So when you have and you pay a company, an experienced cybersecurity company, to thoroughly and effectively pen test your organization, if you have the budget, it's obviously going to be more money to pay their team to take the gloves off and act like and behave like a real hacker would, opposed to, oh, I need a pen test because my insurance company said that I had to have one. How do I check this box? What's the cheapest way to do this, right? So there are companies that do that. And okay, yeah, we can get this done for $5,000, like Blake said, with very limited information, limited scope. What's really the cheapest way that my company can do that? So there's that perspective, just to check the box. And then there's the perspective of, how do we do this right? How do we make sure it's done right for the first time? And how do we really get a real pen test? And that example from pricing is much like anything else that can be priced. The old adage, you get what you pay for, right? We all know that a Ferrari, a Porsche, they're expensive vehicles. If you find one for $500, you know that it's a red flag. There's got to be something wrong, right? So it's kind of the same thing, right? I mean, if you're going to hire a cybersecurity expert, some of them might be $500, $1,500 an hour or more. Some, inexperienced, directly out of school, they may charge $95 an hour. But it's a different level of expertise. You're getting the novice versus the seasoned hacker, right? So it's a whole different experience, more expensive specialists, cardiologists. If you're shopping for a heart valve, and your doctor says, look, this surgery is going to cost you $100,000. Do you really want to find the cheaper provider to do that? Or do you want to find the most experience that all those specialists do day in and day out? Is that one thing? They're honing their craft. They're super good at it. Their success rate and their accolades and their reviews and testimonials from people that have gone through the process are positive. So I think that has a big effect on pricing. But you're absolutely right. Pricing cannot be achieved or given without a proper discovery or an assessment process. And that's part of our methodology. We can't just throw pricing out there because we just don't know. It's an honest approach. If somebody throws pricing out for a project without properly doing a discovery and assessment process, then it's just, in my opinion, it's not ethical and it's unfair. And unless you're getting a fixed fee, there's a lot of problems that can happen with an approach where you don't properly assess.
I've noticed too, in my experience here, a lot of people attach, and not only here, but in other jobs, people attach a higher value to a tangible product. oh, okay, like we talked about, the Ferrari instance, the $500 Ferrari, it must be a Matchbox car. But anyways, you're not going to go to a Ferrari dealership and then go to a Ford dealership and be like, oh yeah, I was at the Ford dealership and their car is $30,000. How come your car is $100,000? And then, oh, okay, well, I can show you this. I can show you that feature. I can show you that feature. I can show you the engine, the exhaust, whatever, right? The build, the leather, stitching, all these features that people attach to like a tangible product make more sense to the human mind because they can touch it, they can feel it, they can see it. But on the flip side, services don't quite scale, and they don't properly uh, they're not properly affixed in that way, unless they're sitting over our shoulder and they're watching us literally try and hack into their own network. They're wondering at the end of the day, oh, what did I pay for? I don't necessarily feel this. I don't feel satisfaction from paying for this. And that's one thing that I've noticed people just don't understand, especially in the services industry. You know, you're paying for experience. You're paying for time. You're paying for energy, effort, and you may not be able to feel it like you would a physical good or a physical product. You can't
That's
touch
right.
it. So somehow I've noticed coming from selling luxury products, like people don't uh they don't respond in the same manner to it, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, I know we're running up on time already, but I think you're right. I think a lot of people can't. It's kind of like health insurance or life insurance rather. It's intangible. You don't really want to pay for it, but you know you need to have it. And unless you go through some life event or a friend, gets hurt or ultimately dies and they don't, you find out they did have health insurance or they did have life insurance and this is what happened, or maybe they did not have the proper insurance and paperwork in place, and then you see what happens to the family. Unless you experience that, um it's kind of like, well, do I really need that? It's this mysterious vapor. you know but the reality of this situation is it's real. The threats are real. The headlines don't lie. This we believe in a layered approach, a trustless approach. We don't like to trust any one vendor or one type of solution, and we encourage you that shop for cybersecurity services to take that approach as well. Try to find vendors that embrace zero trust and trustless technologies that are layered. And the more layers you can layer on top of your business to essentially create an onion or a force field, you're not relying on any one layer. You're relying on the sum of all of those layers together to make you as unhackable as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, trustless is the way to go. Anybody who does it stands out from the crowd, in terms of pricing, in terms of value. You know, you're not always going to get the best for the cheapest price. It just doesn't work like that, especially in today's world. People know their worth, at least in our industry, people know their worth. People are getting paid by the big companies to serve providers. Is it unaffordable? No, it's not unaffordable, but is it worth it? Absolutely.
Yeah. And so one thing I just wanted to kind of close out with is, we are constantly looking at the market and we get the feedback from small businesses on how expensive some of this stuff is. And we're always working as a company to give the most value for our clients. And one of the latest offers that we came up with is for just $500, we do a compliance armor vulnerability assessment. We call it CAVA for short. It's a huge, high value assessment process that leverages proprietary methodology and patented solutions that are very unique, can't find it anywhere else. And we deliver it for just $500. And basically, we give a taste of what extended detection and response XDR technology can offer. And we combine that with the people and we test the humans on your team and do an assessment of them. and we combine that with a review of your maturity level, and we give you a score. We score you against your peers anonymously, of course, but we show you, look, this is where you are on the scale. This is where your peers are on the scale. It's a letter grade system, and it's just a really high value experience that shows you, look, this stuff is not as expensive as you might have thought it was. It's pretty easy to implement for most businesses and situations. And I encourage you guys to go to compliancearmor.com to check it out and sign up today.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll be back, I think, next week for another podcast. We've got plenty of ideas to talk about. In the future, we're going to try and pack as much value as we can into these podcasts in as little time as we can. You know, we don't want to drag these podcasts out, hence why we're trying to cap them. But we've got a lot of cool stuff in the pipeline, a lot of cool topics, I think. I'm definitely excited for the next one. And yeah, I guess we'll see you guys there.
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to kind of throw in here, we'll talk about it in a later podcast, but I'm sure you've seen the headlines around the FTX cryptocurrency exchange and how they didn't have assets and basically the whole thing went bankrupt. And quite frankly, a lot of people suffered badly around losing what they paid for and their assets. And I've said this many, many times before, don't trust any company or exchange or anything like that. Embrace zero trust and trustless technologies. If you're dabbling in cryptocurrency, you should be using a cold wallet where only you control the private keys and no one else. Never share them with anyone, and you control the information and the assets that you hold. Because if you trust any company with anything, you're subject to their rules on security, and if they don't have their stuff together, you in the end are the one that's going to lose. So protect yourself. We want our listeners to be well prepared and protected. Obviously we don't give financial advice, but my point is that from a cybersecurity perspective, if that's a world that you're dabbling in, we could probably make a whole podcast episode or a series on this. The point is the same point that I've driven home before. Use a cold wallet, use zero trust, use encryption, use all of the technologies that are at your fingertips that quite frankly don't even cost that much money, that, do the right thing and embrace those zero trust technologies.
I did see an article that cold wallets, hardware wallets, whatever you want to call them, soared 300% in sales after FTX.
Well, there's probably a back order, probably a shortage. Oh, and by the way, I've said this before too, never buy a cold wallet on Amazon or any other merchant. You have to buy them direct from the manufacturer of the cold wallet. You never want to buy from a reseller. A lot of scammers will buy cold wallets. They'll open them up. They'll put there's a card in there with the secret key, and then they'll repackage it up so it looks all genuine. Then the user will set up that wallet with the pre-configured card, which is a big no-no. And then the hackers wipe the wallet. They wipe it clean. So you never want to do anything like that. You always buy it direct from the manufacturer, and you set up that private key from scratch by yourself. Never put it digitally, type it anywhere. It's physically written, and you store it like it's a bazillion dollars in a vault or a safe place.
Definitely not worth it to save 5 or 10% on Amazon. But I did notice, because I was looking up pricing on hardware wallets pretty recently just to see if they were back ordered, if the price has gone up, kind of like crypto, and or down in that case. But I have noticed that, for example, I think it's Trezor.
Mm-hmm.
Their Nano S, the new Nano S Plus, whatever.
The Nano is Ledger.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, Ledger. Yeah, I did notice that now there is a shipped by Amazon but sold by Ledger. What are your thoughts on those? Because it's like 5 or 10% cheaper.
Yeah,
probably not.
Again, I don't trust it. I'd go direct.
Yeah,
that's just my opinion. I'd rather be safe. I mean, I'd rather go direct, buy it direct, know where I bought it from. I buy a lot from Amazon. We got 1 minute to wrap up. But just in closing, I buy a lot of stuff on Amazon. I'm sure that you do too. But in certain categories where you want something to be genuine, I won't take the chance. Like, I'm sure you won't buy a Rolex on Amazon. Nope. I mean, there's people that'll sell them. But unless you've got a high trust of the vendor, and again, supporting evidence and artifacts to prove that what they're selling is genuine, if it's something that can easily be duped or faked, I will not buy it on Amazon, and I don't recommend you do it either.
Let's leave
Thanks,
it on
guys.
that note. We'll see you on the next one.
All right. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Cybersecurity and Compliance Podcast with Craig Petronella. For other episodes and more information, visit PetronellaTech.com. Also visit our other websites, ComplianceArmor.com and BlockchainSecurity.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for listening, and stay secure.